Hey, what's going on, guys? Hope everyone had a great weekend. And we obviously have a shorter week coming up here with Thanksgiving towards the end of the week. So about 3.5 or 3 days of actual trading. So I still think it's important to be prepared, although we are going to have some time off. I'm kind of excited about the time off, to be honest. I mean, I don't expect this to be a dead week. We usually have some kind of volatility around Thanksgiving and some of these holiday weeks. But we should know that the beginning of December, right, we should see flows from Vana Charm start to return back into the market. We typically see a little bit of the front running occur beginning of December as well. That really leads us into the end of year. And some of these charts are pretty primed. I've talked about this quite a bit. And really, I'm just, if we sell this week, I'm using that as an opportunity to buy the dip. And there's a few names obviously that I will highlight here. MU specifically being the main one, and I've talked about this one. This one's already primary focus number one. I think Intel's close number two, and then Roku is a very close number three. There's a couple setups I want to talk about as well that we can add on here that I think will obviously be nice supplemental trades, but I think these are like the three core ones that I'm focused on. Let's just start with MU. You guys should be very familiar with this one. It shouldn't be any different than any other time I've talked about it. Obviously, we were a little bit scared. I wouldn't even say scared, right? Remember that this kind of broke down into this gap down here, right around 95.58. If you guys remember, or did the fib levels as well. This was kind of our golden pocket, right, for a discounted pullback after that earnings markup, right? Remember this had earnings, it popped, and it really just pulled back, filled the gap, went right into the discounted zone here, right? So this was a good opportunity to go long, and that's really why I pulled the trigger. I know I had a little bit of hesitancy because of NVIDIA's earnings. But at the end of the day, I was kind of like, you know what, this is a really good average that I can get here. I can add pretty heavy into those January contracts. And if we get the pop, right, I can close out a majority of those and then look for a pullback to add into like either June, or I can add a little bit heavier once we get this 105, 108 reclaim. Now we had a really good move. Obviously, those January contracts ended up going like 50%. We got a little bit more juice on the slight break above Thursday's high, right when we had this little wick up here. And then now, what I think is really, really special about this chart is we reclaimed this old zone here, right? And I want to kind of emphasize the weekly chart. If that's cool with everybody, right? It's important to look at your higher time frames. So let me get rid of this. We don't care about that gap anymore. And if we take a look at the weekly, right? We've been shopping in this zone for quite some time. We had this harmonic breakout from earnings that really sent us into this zone. And then from here, it's been shopping for multiple weeks. And then we finally broke that range here, right? We had this bearish weekly candle, obviously from November 11th, or the week of November 11th, and we broke this range support, right? And as we broke this range support, this is where we started to sell down into that gap. But I always talk about separation, right? Whenever you have a key support broken or a key resistance broken, how much distance or separation can be made away from that support and or resistance? And does it pull back on diverging volume, or does it sell back under on high volume and create that kind of like liquidity trap? This is very important because it did break underneath that support at 98.94, but it didn't really create that much separation. No, it did have higher volume, but is this very, very high volume relative to all these other breakdowns or breakouts? Absolutely not, right? So the fact that this now on the second week, right, or the consecutive week, or I'm sorry, I should say subsequent week, broke back above that old support, right, and it reclaimed it on even lower volume. So this is very, very bullish in my opinion. The fact that this sold down and then it was recovered or reclaimed, as I like to use the term, and it ended up getting right back above, right, on low volume. So the fact that this recovered and is now consolidating here, I would look honestly to get any pullbacks if this does sell back down on a pullback back to 98.94, or if this breaks up, and I'll talk about this progression gap in a second. And if it can get back above this progression gap, I would look to take a little bit more ads here at 105, maybe 108.65, right? But this is a very, very clean chart with the simple fact that it had a nasty weekly candle on increasing volume, didn't create a lot of separation, which I would be a little worrisome seeing if I was a bear. The fact that it recovered back above this key zone in very easy method, right? It did it very, very easily. It did it on low volume, and we closed above relatively close or close to the highs, right? So that's a very important weekly close. Now, really, right, the whole 105, 108 area shouldn't be of mystery to you guys. We talked about it. This is the gap down. This was also a gap up. So we basically have a double gap here, right, or a double void in the chart in terms of like volume and liquidity. So this is an area that this will likely gravitate towards to kind of fill out and collect orders in that range. But this is also a key SR flip. We've talked about this multiple times, right? This is that old earnings kind of like gap up again. Remember, we sold off. We had the higher low here. We had the lower high range that sent us lower, right? Just a very, very key spot on the chart. And it's kind of crazy how this worked out, where we have multiple ranges that have been developed here, but then we have a double gap, right? That essentially didn't get filled on either try. A gap above and then a gap below. So really interesting spot where I kind of have a dual-sided idea where if this does pull back, I would look to add again if it can just hold 98.94, or if it can break out through 105, right? Whether it's a simple break and base above like that, or maybe it pushes up to 108 first and then it pulls back to 105, right? Whatever it ends up doing, I would be looking for it to break through the spot on harmonic high volume, right, to kind of absorb the sellers, and then ideally, right, sellers back off, and then we see a slow pullback or a divergence, right? And I would look to add again, and this would get us a really nice kind of entry or more size into those Junes if you guys didn't already take them with me, right? This would be a good opportunity to add into those right at the middle ground of this. Obviously, you always want to catch the bottom, but if you guys didn't take them already, it's okay. This would be a good midpoint to add, and then you would expect a breakout, pull back and hold, and then a retest of these highs up here. I think this is ultimately where we're going to go, right? This bottom has been swept. We kind of reclaim that zone. If we trade to the middle, this is just going to be a zone-to-zone trade where I think we're going to trade right back to the top, and ideally we just get a nice breakout through that top, and I've already marked this out for you guys, right? We can get a push above, pull back and hold, and I think we have a nice trajectory towards 122, and then obviously our target's 127 to like 130, right? That's the reason I want to get June contracts, or I've been talking about the June contracts, because I want to have time, right, to have this trade up to that 130 level. I think this is going to be a big trade. So this is still one of my favorite charts. It's gotten a little bit choppier, a little bit sloppier than I would have liked. I mean, ideally, this this really kind of had the double bottom here and then broke out. But remember, these charts usually need some kind of absorption factor to happen. And the fact that we haven't sold on any high volume is still really, really clean in my opinion, and still really productive. But just a simple retest of that discounted zone I think was healthy, especially after such a gap up on earnings. So I think this chart still looks really, really good. So yeah, that's first and foremost. I just wanted to cover that really quickly because obviously this is one of my bigger positions and one of the biggest names I've been talking about. All right, Intel I've been talking about as well for quite some time. This one's been a little bit longer than I would have expected, but that's okay, right? I remember I talked about 24.59, which is right here, being a key level that this needs to hold. I did get more time on these contracts, as I told you guys, because I did expect it to not be like a perfect pullback. It's okay to have a little bit of slippage or an undercut of that level, but you guys can see, right? This was that old support. It ended up being a temporary resistance as we built out this nice base over several weeks. We had a harmonic breakout, and then you guys can see we're pulling back on low volume, right? Very, very simple chart. I don't think it's anything super sophisticated or anything that it's like gate kept. This is a very simple chart. Obviously, like the flag here or the pullback on it has taken a little bit longer than I think some of us would have liked. But that's okay, right? We had somewhat of a gap here or a liquidity void just below, right around 23.58. I think it pulled down, essentially retested that spot, and I think it's good to go, right? This was a nice day here that it ended up filling on the 20th. And we closed once again pretty close to 24.59. I don't know if this necessarily needs to get a pop and a retest at this point. I would just expect this thing to start moving back towards the highs pretty quickly. I don't really have much else to update on this one. I've just been progressively adding into this one, like 3 contracts. It's, still a really pretty chart. I know some people are kind of like, oh, dude, is this thing going to go? Got to have patience, guys. Remember, I always talk about context is key. This is so close to risk, right? And that's what you want to have. You want to be as close to risk as possible when you're taking your trades, and then obviously targeting a high reward target, right? And that's literally how you get a very good R multiple. That's how you can control your losses to make sure they're small losses with big wins. And that's kind of the whole goal behind this, guys. And it's pretty objective where I lose. And this one, still stays really relatively simple. I mean, a close under 24.59, which is this little green line here with some high volume, I'll probably be out. But things did change just a tad with this gap here. It pulled down into the gap. So like I said, I let this trade breathe a little bit. You have to contextualize this. This thing has all the way till June of next year. I think it's fine, right? Just give it a little bit of breathing room, see how it reacts to the gap. Obviously, we had a nice candle off of that with a long lower wick, and now we're right back to that spot, right? We closed 9 cents away from that level. So I'm totally cool letting this trade breathe out a little bit, and giving it weekly closes. Maybe a monthly close, we'll have to see, but I'm really okay with this one and just kind of letting this one hang around 24.59. And ideally, right, we just end up getting that pop, because this is no doubt in my mind a flag or a wedge or whatever you guys want to call it. I just like the compression here. Intel is typically a low IV name, and with the compression here already, if this name can just get a pop or a big gap or some kind of news, these contracts will absolutely fly. Yeah, and I'm expecting 29.70 probably by the end of the year, guys, like going into January. So I'm really excited for this one, but no real update other than that, okay? Okay, this is another one. Obviously, I've talked about quite a bit. The lagging name in the ARKK basket. Pretty much every other name has gone except for this one, and this one's been seeing some anomaly volume on some of the lower time frames, but nobody's really talking about this one, and it's very, very interesting. I think that the news with TTD, which is the trade desk, them kind of jumping into the streaming world, definitely took a little bit of the volume I think that we typically would have seen that went into Roku. Obviously, it went into TTD, and that was the reason for the sell-off day, right? If you guys remember, it was this day here on the Wednesday, the 20th, but it really didn't do anything drastic. If you guys see, right, it kind of broke underneath that zone and actually dug under quite a bit, but it closed right back above, and this is one of the highest volume days, right? So a little suspicious that it kind of broke underneath our earnings candle, kind of like open, right, or our high. It closed back above, and then if you guys have noticed for the past 2 days, we've had very, very tight candle compression near those highs, right? And still closing right above that 68 spot. 68, if you guys don't remember, it's essentially our earnings candle or our footprint candle high, right around that range. Whether you want to take the wick or you guys want to take the open, it doesn't really matter. It's not that much of a difference. But if you guys also look, right, this is also this earnings candle, right? This is its open or its high, right? So very, very key spot here if you guys can't tell. Obviously, we have this higher trend line kind of building out. So we have our low, we have our higher low. I don't think we need to come down and necessarily touch this. I think this could be our third consecutive or our second consecutive higher low. This really just looks like a launch pad, guys. This thing looks pretty primed. However, I would have preferred a better candle close here on Friday. I wish this would have closed near the highs. I didn't really like the wick that occurred. I think it was towards the end of day, if I'm not mistaken, where we kind of just randomly sold off. But we sold off, I would say, pretty healthily, right? It wasn't anything super, super crazy. Obviously, the last 15 minutes were a little bit gross, but we're at the top of this old range here, right? If you guys can take a look, if this can just kind of hold this these old highs, I think this thing still looks fine. But really simple trade. Once again, if you guys talk about risk to reward, we're right here against the 68.03 level. Lose below that, right? I mean, you have to contextualize it however you see fit. Remember, we have until like 2025, I think, the March contracts. Or I know some of you guys have actually gone a little bit further than the March contracts. I know some people have gotten like June. This is relatively inexpensive. It's been shopping for so long now, so it doesn't really matter what you got as long as you have a little bit of time behind them. But yeah, risking 68, whether it's a daily close or a weekly close, right? However you want to contextualize that. But this thing still looks really good. Overall on the weekly, right, you guys can just see how crucial this level is. Once again, right, just very, very simple chart. Even the break out above this was on low volume. The sell-off off of this spot wasn't anything super crazy. And if you guys remember, this week here from the 28th of October, a lot of that volume came as this sold down from earnings, and then it was bought back up, right? So kind of a misconstrued candle here. You'd have to go digging into this one to really understand what happened. This chart I still think is really good. I still think it's really good. It's just really going to come down to, can it hold 68? And then if it continues to be compressed without a break any further lower on high volume, I suspect we'll start to see some kind of short cover or some news catalyst really aid us in that upside move to really finish out this absorbed zone. I've talked about this a lot. The 60 or 78.61 is very, very absorbed. This has become, if you guys are Wyckoffeans, like a path of least resistance type move, where a lot of these sellers, at least the passive ones, have been kind of taken out, right? So this should move relatively easy through that 78.61 if we try to get to that spot again. Sorry, I keep hiccuping. But yeah, overall, I'm just excited for this one. Very simple risk to reward trade. Even if you guys want to open it up and let it breathe just a little bit, right? Let's just say our entries are like perfect right here off 68. You guys can even just risk, down here, 60.05. I know that'd be kind of a big move down. We'd have to see what the options do, but I wouldn't mind averaging down, maybe 3 to 5 contracts as it's making its way down to give us like a trend line touch here. Maybe get my full position off the trend line and then risk this zone here. Not the zone, sorry, the lower wick off 60.28. But even at that, right, looks like it's going to be a big drop. But if we take it like a R multiple, this is still a 291, right? So just smart adds all the way down if you guys really wanted to do that, or if you guys really wanted to, you guys can play it really tight off of this this little Wednesday, the 20th low, and your odds become even more favorable, right? So kind of play it however you choose to see fit. But I love this chart. I still think this one is absolutely primed, and it's literally the last name in the ARK basket or the ARK bucket to not go just yet, and it is setting up in my opinion. So still a big focus for me, and progressive ads on this one I still think are fine, absolutely fine. Even if this gets a pop and it can even hold like this little gap here, right? If we can just kind of get above this spot here, I still think even here would be good ads, right? And still relatively close to 68, right? Not bad at all if we can get something like that. So just kind of keeping this one on watch, and yeah, just really happy so far with how it's held 68. Okay, I want to talk about new stuff now. This one shouldn't be all that new, right? We've talked about Tesla quite a bit, and we talked about it last week where I was thinking about getting a position here on this compression. I just wanted to see it tighten up here at these highs, and we got 4 really nice days of compression where contracts cooled quite a bit. I think a couple of them, I've been looking at like 1220 contracts for 420, just essentially targeting all-time highs. And they basically dropped like almost 40-30%, somewhere in that range. That would have been a really good entry, but I just wasn't sure. I was kind of wondering if we might get like a drop that would have cooled those contracts even more. Maybe this pulls down into this gap here, then I would have taken a long, as you guys know, kind of the system that I have for that. But we ended up getting a pop here on Friday. Now, I wouldn't say it's anything to like freak out about. We didn't miss this trade. We didn't really close super strong at the highs, but obviously we did that breakout over that trend line resistance, over these daily highs here. I still just want to see like 1 or 2 more days, guys. I just want to see maybe this week where we can kind of chop just around these highs or that close there on the daily, and I'm going to look to take an entry, right? I might take like 2 to 3, nothing super crazy. Remember, this is like a supplementary chart that I think we could get somewhat of an explosive move towards the end of year on. I still have my 3 main or core ones, which are MU, Intel, Roku, but this could be a nice one to kind of add on top, right? We've already done this a couple times previously. Obviously back here, right, where I had the 1220, what was it, like 300 calls? Those went insane. I didn't have it here, remember, I had it like back here, somewhere in this range, but obviously those went really, did really well. Kind of the same thing. I would get like 3 to 5 contracts. Still looking at the 1220 expiration just because these are a little bit pricey now, but would be targeting about like the 420 call and just looking for this to get to that all-time high at 414. And it doesn't have to get to 420. 414, those would still make a lot of money. But yeah, just a little bit more days of compression here, kind of either around the close from Friday or right around these daily highs from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, etc. If you want to draw like a little zone here, you guys absolutely could. Some of you guys may even just view this as like a trend line retest, which I really don't believe that much in, but just a simple trend line retest, and I think this should be good to continue higher, right? If this ends up selling off, I would welcome a dip, right? If this starts to sell back underneath this trend line and underneath these daily, this daily range, I would kind of sit on hands, guys. I think this can pull back into that 320, 330 zone. And that would probably be the ideal entry or the optimal entry, but just depends on where we open in pre-market. Like I said, I won't go super heavy into this one just because I feel like we're already so high that it's not going to yield a full-size position. It's just a little bit too risky. But if this can pull back here, I will put some size into this one and just get some exposure, and then look for that, kind of that move up to 384 and then 414, right? Weekly candle. Still, like I said, pretty good. We almost closed with an inside bar, so we're still not quite broken out of that weekly high there on from the 11th. But you guys can see, right, we have so much room still to the upside. And if you guys don't know Tesla, or you guys haven't traded Tesla when it's already kind of broken structure and it has these harmonic breaks like this, that can move very, very quickly to the upside. So pretty excited about this one. Just unfortunate, right? I think I didn't want this move to happen quite yet, which what happened on Friday. I would have preferred, like I said, a drop or one more day of consolidation. But it is what it is. 1220, 420 calls are definitely what I'm looking at if we can just kind of hang around these highs or just retest that trend line. Okay, so a short is in the books. It's a little bit different, right? We've talked about the kind of dispersion where a lot of the money was going into Nvidia, was going into a lot of these, like, I wouldn't say Mag 7 specifically, because we saw some names really diverge, specifically Apple and I think it was Google at the time. But remember, Nvidia was sucking in pretty much all the flow, all the money was gravitating towards that name, and then we saw distribution occur on AMD, right? And then AMD followed suit. It did finally have its markup phase, but ever since then, it's been putting in lower highs. We've been trying to essentially break these old major higher lows from a macro perspective. And then clearly, you guys, you can see, as we were selling, we had a higher low kind of pivot found here, or just kind of a low pivot found. We pushed up to maybe get to the bear gap, and then we had another lower high. We broke under, and look at the clear resistance here. You can't really ignore this, guys. We've been rejecting this spot multiple times at 139.72, and I'm not usually, I would kind of pull the trigger here and just have my risk. If it closes above 139.72, I would stop out of this one. But for right now, I really just want to see how we react to this weekly trend line, guys. This is a very, very big spot if we kind of zoom out on the weekly. I mean, this ties all the way back to the 2022 lows, where we just kept having higher low after higher low after higher low, kind of pressed off of this trend line. And it kind of comes to a kind of like a major point here right around 132. This is that higher low from September 3rd. Coincides very nicely with the trend line. But if we do snap under this spot here, as you guys can see, I mean, we pretty much have an open floodgate all the way down to that 121.83 zone, which was back here from August 5th, right? That I think that was the carry trade, as well as the Israel kind of bombing news, right, where we bottomed out. But it has pretty much a straight shot down to that zone. And I know it's kind of like everyone's like, oh, well, like you're bullish on MU, you're bullish on Intel. Guys, we've seen divergence amongst similar names that are in the same theme, right? We've seen AMD sell while NVIDIA is continually going up. We saw TSM have its crazy rally while NVIDIA pretty much stayed flat. Like, there's names in here that can have money leave one name specifically and go to laggers, or one name can kind of get glued, right, like NVIDIA, while the other names can kind of hold still or sell off. NVIDIA was rallying. That can happen here, right? With AMD, we kind of are starting to get into like a really, really bad territory. So we can see AMD start to sell and distribute, and that money now go into MU, Intel, back into NVIDIA, right? It doesn't always have to follow suit directly with its other peers that are in that current sector. So I really like the look of this. If it can kind of break underneath, I would say this trend line here, but specifically 132.11, I might look to pull the trigger and jump into the 120 puts, maybe even the 115 if we can get some kind of like, I don't want to say we're going to liquidate, but if we can get some kind of crazy move, I do think we can come to 115. There's a major gamma level at that spot, so somebody is definitely kind of building a position for the 115 puts. So that could be worth a shot, but I think the best one would be the 120 puts for December 20th. So that's definitely going to be something on radar if we break under the trend line, as well as kind of confirm a close underneath 132, or maybe we break under. I would give it an opportunity to retest, and if we retest and reject, I would add a little bit more size off of that rejection, right? So big chart here. Just I want to have a short on hand just in case. I feel like a lot of the charts that I've been looking at are bullish, or I'm waiting for pullbacks to kind of add into those swings. I think this would be a nice one to kind of pivot and add some short-term exposure to the downside if this ends up kind of snapping under that level. Okay, I have to cover the ones, even though they're not like full-size positions or things that I'm kind of just messing around with. They are things that I alerted nonetheless. Like I said, they're things that I'm kind of just flirting with. It's not super serious, but BA, Nike, and CLSK are definitely things that I started. So I do want to cover them. It's important because they can turn into serious positions. But as of now, I just kind of dabbled in them. BA, very, very interesting chart where we have this potential 3 weekly or 3 monthly lower low that's kind of setting up, where we've seen, I wouldn't say like telltale signs of accumulation, but it is kind of setting up that 3 lower low. And then we had this anomaly candle that really occurred on the week of October the 28th, right? I think this is when their strike ended, but really it even superseded their earnings candle, right? This traditionally would be a footprint candle that I would kind of keep my eye on to see if, hey, did a campaign end or did a new one begin? Obviously, we've been in straight sell mode on this one, so I assume a buy campaign has started and the selling one is currently finished, but that didn't really show up till this October 29th candle. So I've had this marked for some time, and what we really saw is just kind of an undercut on this where it looked like we were going to sell and put in a new low and really start to sell even lower. But on the weekly, as you guys can see, right, we're starting to see this somewhat reverse, right? We had that footprint candle, and then the past two sell-off candles have been on even lower volume. If you guys take a look here on the monthly, I know the monthly's about to close as well. This looks like it could be a sweep, guys, that kind of went underneath that footprint candle from the 29th, right? Very, very important as you get closer to the end of the month to start looking at those monthly candles because these do set up quite frequently. But guys, this kind of looks exactly like the 3 lower low accumulation. I wanted to obviously see how, if we closed above 147.58, which is that footprint candle, and we did. So yeah, definitely started a position on this. Ideally, you know, we don't pull back, but if it does pull back, I'll kind of keep an eye on it off 147.58 to see if it can hold that and then maybe start to bounce and trend, right? Start to give us a push back up. And really this, I'm looking for this to go to 159.70, which is this prior low here. Obviously, major support here. We broke down, retested. We almost reclaimed it here, but then sold and made a new low. But if we can push up to 159.70, I'm pretty optimistic, right? I think that this can then kind of get above that, maybe trade above this for a little bit, and then make its way up to 167 to 173. I think this can definitely fill that gap, hence why I took the 175 calls, and I got plenty of time. I definitely think that this is going to require some kind of earnings markup, so I wanted to get exposure to the January 29th earnings date, and really I think that we can start to see a trend flip on this one and start to have some kind of change of character where we start putting in higher lows and higher highs, and then really I think that this really confirms once it breaks 159.70 that we're correct, right? I think at that point there's no denying that this will kind of move to that 170 spot. So definitely something I wanted to start and keeping my eyes on just on a side screen. Exposure was definitely worth it. So if you guys are wanting to start this or kind of the thesis behind that, that is definitely why. But you know, there could be ads on this one, but these contracts are pretty expensive, so I don't know if I will. But I definitely wanted to cover that really quickly. And then obviously CLSK. Pretty simple. Very similar look to Mara, right? Where Mara had this kind of like this gap here, this progression gap, where we reclaimed it on what day was this? November 20th on Wednesday, where we kind of broke above that. And if you guys remember, I was looking for some kind of pullback for it to hold there, and I was going to look for it to kind of push back towards the highs, and specifically that 2730 spot. We just never really got the pullback onto the wick. We kind of got one here if you wanted to use like the open or the open of that candle, which would have been the true gap, right? It did kind of pull back here on Thursday the 21st. I should have taken it then, but I didn't have my level there. And it is what it is. I just kind of missed this one, right? But pretty much the same exact concept where we got to break or a reclaim back above the progression gap high here. Remember, progression gaps are these guys. You guys forgot. We're just going to use the wicks right now. Right? This was your progression gap. Obviously, it gapped up. We sold into it. We reclaimed the progression gap high. I was looking for a retest of that and then a move up. CLSK has pretty much the same exact setup. Right, progression gap. Let's get rid of some of our zones here really quick. I should have taken calls off this, by the way. It basically pulled right back down into that key break of structure level, but is what it is. But same exact setup here, right, where we ended up having the progression gap. We sold into it, obviously undercut it just a little bit, but now we broke back above and we closed above, right? So if we take the wick or the body, either way, we closed above that. So I'm looking for this to kind of pull back and hold 1483. It kind of gave us that at the close, but I did start a position as it broke back above, and it looked pretty apparent that we were going to close. And ideally, right, we have some kind of markup to 1787, the range high. So pretty simple little lotto trade that I took there. That's why I started that one. Ideally, I was hoping that Bitcoin also got the bid and kind of broke above 100K. I think it rejected it. It got pretty damn close. I don't know exactly what happened. I think we sold off a little bit yesterday, and obviously we recovered a little bit today. We'll see what ends up happening. I grabbed the December 20th on those just to have time, so it's not like a terrible loss if it ends up rejecting and selling pretty hard. But I'd like the look of this one. It was a good opportunity, I thought, to get back to like 1787 or 18. And then last but not least, I got some exposure on Nike. Nike, shout out to Pat, by the way. I keep giving him his kudos on this one, but this never really filled the gap, right? Remember, we were looking for it to breach the gap here at 77.13. It pulled all the way back down, and it kind of reaccumulated off the COVID 2020. No, was it the 2022 gap? Oh yeah, it was the COVID gap back here, right? So 2020. You guys can see that here, right? It pulled back down into that zone. It accumulated off of that zone. We had the 3 lower low. Very, very tight kind of spread here too. It really didn't. Each new low was not created with a lot of separation. This is what I always talk about, right? Each new low was very, very minimal, and then we had a big spark up. Remember right here, I think on Wednesday, once it finally reclaimed that gap, right, we ended up having Bill Ackman, the news that he bought into this, so this really juiced those cons. But we didn't actually fill the gap up here, right? We kind of got midway through. Obviously, volumes have been pretty low, so I think this needed to come all the way back down to reaccumulate, right, or recollect inventory here at the lows before another markup begins. So this has been selling off, as you guys can see, like I said, on low volume. Pretty obvious if you just take a look at the chart here. Nice little divergence. And it came right back to the start of that, literally 72.33, that COVID gap, right? Pushed all the way back down, right? And I ended up taking the position as it started to kind of move up here, as I really confirmed on the weekly, right? If you guys take a look at the weekly, this is why I took this. Really nice hammer candle, high volume after the sell-off that we've been seeing on multiple weeks of low volume. Finally have somewhat of a reversal candle off of that low again. I think we could get, honestly, I don't know if we'll like kind of break out and then start a trend, right? If we start making higher lows into that gap and then eventually getting up to 94.19, or we're going to have just some kind of explosive move, some kind of news headline. I mean, I have no way of telling, but 94.19 is definitely the target here. I think that this can just get back above this gap here, right? And I think it can slowly start to trend. Then if you guys take a look, right, we have another gap right here. What the heck? What is it? Why is it doing that? There we go. We'll just use this as blue lines now. But we have another gap that this can easily trade back to, 85 to 87, right? So we can just kind of reconfirm back above 77.40, which we obviously closed above. I would like to see this, really start to trend back above, right? Really, I think this is a simple chart, so that's the reason I took it. Risk for me is going to be a break below 72.33. But yeah, really just targeting 94.19 with the 95 calls. I might add into this one if we start to see some really good structure development with those clear higher lows being an area to risk, and just not only risk, but just take ads off of and then kind of move our stop loss up with that. I think this has a really good opportunity to move to 94.19. Dude, even to move back up to like 110, I think this could be a really good chart for 2025. As much as I don't like the company, I definitely think this is undervalued at this point, and this could be a good chart for the remainder of 2025. Right, this could just be the first phase of this. So definitely a chart I want to kind of keep my eyes on and just see the levels that it's holding. Obviously, I'm going to kind of keep an eye on flow as well. These are the names that always intrigue me when they're this beaten down and we're starting to see structure shift just a little bit, or it's pulling back into really key areas of interest. I will look at some flow. But yeah, for now, pretty light size, but we'll see what we end up getting with this one.